Hello, everyone. My name is Nadia Berenstein. Some of you may know me already, some of you may not. Um, I don't work in the flavor industry. I'm not a flavorist. What I am is a historian, and um, technically a historian of science and technology. And I've spent the last few years, including for my PhD at University of Pennsylvania, studying the history of flavor science and the scientific and cultural role that flavor research and flavor additives have played in building the modern food system. So what I wanted to do today is share some scenes from the from the past of flavors, give you a little bit of a historical appetizer to kick off the 2020 NAFS conference this year. So hold on one second while I pull up my slideshow. All right, so all of you should hopefully be seeing the first slide in this presentation, which I cheekily called Back to the Future. Historians love movie puns and puns of all kinds. Because I wanted to kind of try to connect some threads between the history of flavors and specifically the history of how flavors have and people who work with flavors have imagined the future of food and flavors. And the possibilities for flavor additives in the flavor industry in these times of whatever you want to call them. So to begin, I just wanted to kind of place this in a context. In a certain way of looking at things, flavor additives are very old technologies, ancient technologies even. Herbs, spices, resins, these ways of transforming the sensory qualities of food date back to antiquity, and often, in addition to giving different dishes a certain little something, they also provided functional benefits, preservatives, for instance, or many flavoring compounds were also thought of as having therapeutic purposes and benefits. Not to mention the fact that the trade in spices and aromatic materials was one of the chief forces in kind of creating global trade and the modern world. So, but even if we define flavor additives, the way that I tend to think of them as products of a kind of synthetic organic chemical industry, they're still more than 150 years old. The image that you see on your screen right now is of the Schimmel and Company factory for essential oils and synthetic flavor and fragrance materials outside of Leipzig in Germany. The company and this property is actually owned by Bell today, but Leipzig was one of the first, or Schimmel in Leipzig was one of the first companies to sort of invest in research and production of novel flavor and fragrance materials, and also to kind of position itself as the center of this kind of knowledge production of flavor science and perfumery science and chemistry. So that's the past, right? What I want to talk to you today is not about how flavors are these very old and even traditional components of foods, but how flavors and flavor science has always been aligned with the future of food and future possibilities for food. So to begin, I wanted to start with a man named Gilbert Harvey in Indianapolis, Indiana. Hurdy was a chemist. He had his degree from Amherst. He was a performer in amateur operettas and theatricals. He was also the proprietor of a struggling carbonated water bottling company in 1909, or sometime between 1909 and 1913, when he boarded an Indianapolis streetcar and caught what I like to think of as a whiff of destiny in the perfume of a fellow rider, of a woman who was standing next to him on the train. He stood there and he smelled something that smelled to him exactly like Concord grapes. Concord grapes, for any of you who haven't had them, are different than the standard California seedless red and white grapes that we're used to today in fruit plates and dining halls. They have what's called a foxy aroma, a kind of muskier note, which reminds me of the odor of or the taste of grape Jolly Ranchers, which is kind of how I got into studying flavors to begin with. That's a different story. So Gilbert Harvey, carbonated water bottling company proprietor, smelled this perfume, sort of made this connection with Concord grapes, and decided to try to find the chemical compound that this woman was wearing that could add the grape flavor to, or produce a grape flavor that could be sold along with his, until then, plain carbonated water. It turned out that this molecule, which probably all of you know, is methylenthranolate, which had been produced synthetically by Schimmel and other companies since the end of the 19th century, and sold as synthetic neroli oil, or synthetic oil, which was sold at that time as synthetic neroli oil or synthetic orange blossom essence, including by Schimmel, the company where researchers had isolated the compound in, I think it was jasmine flowers and also neroli flowers. Methylenthranolate was by that point a new but somewhat commonly available perfume material. What Gilbert Harvey, who ended up founding a company called Hurdy Peck to produce bottlers flavors, did was kind of make this connection between this available synthetic compound and the odor of grapes, and use that to produce a grape flavoring for what was becoming a very popular new product, which were bottled flavored carbonated waters, bottled sodas. He was not the first or the only one. He may have been the first, I'm not sure, but he was not the only person, the only company out there who was making this connection between methylenthranolate and grape flavor. Here I just have for you a couple of ads from the 19-teens, the first for Hurdy Peck Concord grape extract, the second for one made by Sethnes Company, advertising their Concord grape soda. And you'll see that both of them and many of the other, these were not the only ads of this kind, companies were kind of promoting this to soda manufacturers, to bottling companies as true fruit extract. This idea that there was a connection between this synthetic chemical and the actual flavor of grapes, of Concord grapes. this was not just a message that was communicated between manufacturers of bottlers flavors and producers of bottled beverages, but a message that got conveyed to consumers. So one of the products that I got really interested in when I was researching my dissertation is this soda called New Grape, which still exists, but which was one of the first really kind of hit bottled carbonated beverages. They made this grape flavored soda, right? And they, starting in the early 1920s, the Great American Cooling System is what they called it, right? They were based in Atlanta, and there was this vogue, which also coincided with Prohibition, right? And the desire for soft drinks, refreshments that didn't have alcohol in them, that had tangy, distinctive flavors. And so they really promoted themselves as not just as, you know, a flavor you can't forget, like a really distinctive flavor, but also something that directly called to mind all the flavors of the vineyard, the true flavor of Concord grape. And including in their, you know, in their labeling, they did not, as you'll see from the bottom right image, didn't mention the fact that they had were using artificial flavors or flavor additives of any kind. Well, this ended up not being the case, but not because methylenthranolate was not actually found in Concord grapes. In fact, it is one of the characterizing flavor compounds in Concords. The Bureau of Chemistry, the precursor to today's FDA, and the FTC, in their efforts to enforce the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act, became interested in the composition of flavor additives and the way that they were labeled and marketed. So in the 19-teens, 1920s, early 1920s, there was no basic research into the flavor chemistry of fruit. So people didn't know whether methylenthranolate just evoked the flavor of Concord grapes in the vineyard, or whether it was actually in Concord grapes and other American species of grapes themselves. So the Bureau of Chemistry actually did the research, investigating the chemical composition of actual grape juice to try to determine whether methylenthranolate was actually in grapes. It turns out that it was. As some of you may know, many of the early compounds that the flavor industry was using in the late 19th, early 20th century ended up actually being later found in the fruits that they were trying to evoke. So it was, you know, so the mere presence of methylenthranolate was not an indication that the beverage was artificial. But the FTC and the FDA found other ways by kind of determining the total content of methylenthranolate, for instance, by finding the presence of artificial colors to try to make the determination of whether something was truly flavored with grape juice or whether it had an imitation flavor that had to be revealed in a label. So after the research into methylenthranolate and this kind of method of detecting and measuring it, there were a ton of different Bureau of Chemistry decisions, sanctions against flavor companies, and an FTC penalty on New Grape and many other grape soda manufacturers, which caused them or required them to change their labeling. So thereafter, you will see that they have to declare that they are made with imitation grape flavor. But a lot of flavor companies at the time and flavor manufacturers at the time saw this a different way, right? So the Bureau of Chemistry, precursor to the FDA, and the FTC saw this notion of labeling and of making this distinction between natural and artificial as essential to protecting consumers from adulteration and commercial fraud. In their view of it, the addition of a synthetic flavorant was something that reduced the value of a product, and thus had to be disclosed. But people who worked in the industry, both in this kind of nascent industry making, flavoring substances, and also in food manufacturing industry, saw it a different way. They saw the possibilities of what you could do with synthetic flavors as exceeding the things that were possible if a company was forced to stick to only the things that were considered natural. So flavoring a carbonated beverage with only grape juice at the time would have caused any number of problems, from shelf life and stability issues to simply not delivering the kind of flavor punch or flavor intensity that consumers wanted. So there's this sort of conflict that's set up, as I see it, between this kind of virtue that's acceded to only natural substances, right, or things that are defined as natural, which is already, not a stable category, and this other view of flavorings and other additives as scientifically developed food technologies that are actually adding value to food and adding other benefits to food. And this is a dispute that I think still has to be resolved, has yet to be resolved today. But one of the ways that it expressed itself, I thought this ad kind of pinpoints it. The goodness of a grape drink depends on the quality and distinction of the imitation flavor. I think this is from Beverage Journal, late 1920s. But this idea that quality is not aligned with naturalness, but that the possibilities of achieving highest quality and distinction actually come with this greater knowledge and ability to manipulate the synthetic compounds and to make good imitations. That the best grape drinks, in fact, or the goodest in the terms of this ad, are the ones that use the best imitations, not the ones that stick most closely to ideas of what counts as natural. So that said, that kind of conflict set up, I want to jump a few decades into the future to post-war America, which was, as you can see from this Life magazine cover from the early 1960s, from these images of supermarkets, was a time of really rapid transformation in the food system, especially after rationing and other austerities of the Second World War. Suddenly, you have, as Life put it, a bounty of food, produced in part by science and technology, and by investments in technologies of distribution, like the cold chain, and by this kind of almost like dizzying choice, right? Suddenly shoppers are pushing these giant carts down the wide aisles of supermarkets and choosing for themselves between this kind of staggering and growing array of different products. One historian has dubbed this the golden age of processed food. He did not, as you can assume, mean that in a nice way, but there were all kinds of new food products. So TV dinners, different new flavors of gelatins, cheese and Swiss and ham flavored snacks, Tang. Hold on, I need to take a little break here. Okay, I'm back. Yes, there was this new world of different food products for new kinds of eating occasions, including snacking. And these products needed new flavors that were developed for this changing and expanding array of new applications. So this is an advertisement for Dodge and Olcott, right? In a food industry trade journal. I think it was Food Engineering, basically offering itself as a partner to the food industry to develop flavors that were especially or explicitly developed for all of these new applications. And this was sort of a big transformation in the flavor industry after the post-war. Many of these companies, including Dodge and Olcott, had actually existed had been around since the 19th century, but they were positioning themselves explicitly as these centers of research and development, kind of adjunct to the research and development that was being, and partners to the R&D that was happening in the food industry, in the military, in academia. So I just wanted to show you, take a little interlude to show you some of my favorite ads from this period, and they're just all great. Space age flavors with that country kitchen taste. This is a Freeze and Freeze advertisement from 1958. And I think it really captures the spirit of what the flavor industry was trying to accomplish at this time, right? So using the latest technology, including this kind of expanding array of available synthetic chemicals and processes for purifying them and for manufacturing them, such as encapsulated flavors, to incorporate into these new categories of novel foods that would both evoke the future, the space age, and also the past, the country kitchen. Here are some more ads, and seriously, I could talk about, I love advertising images, but I could talk about these things forever. But all of these kind of explicitly mention basic research or novel research that's being conducted within these different flavor companies. Fritchie Brothers, Firmenich, Norda is the one on the far right, into the chemistry of food and flavor that they're making available to customers in the food and beverage industries. Here's another one, Firmenich, Warner Jenkinson. And I should also say you see a lot of, this is kind of a first period of business mergers for some of these companies, because the process of R&D is like a capital intensive one. So you see, for instance, a merger between Fritchie and Dodge and Olcott. And a big part of this is driven by new analytic technologies. This is an image from Givaudan's kind of house journal for its flavor business, the Givaudan Flavorist, talking about the technological armamentarium of their laboratories, right? So by the gas chromatograph comes online in the mid 1950s, becomes available in the mid 1950s. It's adopted by flavor companies in the flavor industry, and that, along with mass spec, by the mid 60s become kind of de rigueur, like a necessary part of what it means to work in the flavor business, that you're doing basic research into the chemistry of flavors in foods, and the chemistry of flavor changes in foods. This is also something that, so in a lot of the history of science and chemistry, you have, especially chemistry, you have this moment where, like, you see this pattern repeated over and over, where previously there were artisans, or artisan-like people who were doing things through tacit knowledge and experience, and became experts almost the way that, by apprenticeship methods, almost the way that someone in a trade learns how to do something. And then a machine comes along that quantifies things, and that form of expertise is obliterated and replaced by this more exact form of knowledge. The opposite happens in the flavor industry. The moment at which these machines that can claim to sort of break open the mystery of flavor, or the riddle of flavor in foods, come online is also the moment when flavorists professionalize as both individuals who have scientific expertise and experience, and who have a creative insight into the way that compounds work together to produce flavors. So in a way, it's a very interesting case study that contradicts a lot of what we know about, or a lot of what we think we know, or the stories that we tell about other scientific fields and professions. Anyways, so 1950s, 1960s, food systems, food industries are changing rapidly, are industrializing rapidly. At the same time, the flavor industry is positioning itself as this center of basic research and development, and also of creative product development, and undertaking a lot of the kind of basic research into the chemistry and food and flavor that the food industry, is almost offshoring to them. Not all of these investments went well. I like to talk about the fate of Aerosol Foods. Aerosols were a really big product category in the 1950s and 60s. You had spray paint, you had spray veneer, you had Raid roach spray, you had hairspray. And there was also a belief that foods could one day approach the level of convenience that was achieved by an aerosolized push button, especially, Ready Whip, I think, or whipped cream topping was one of the first successful aerosol products. So the flavor industry, the food industry, and the canning industry, and chemical industry, DuPont, manufacturer of chemical propellants, put a lot of money into trying to develop aerosol foods, right? So you had kind of like reports of it like this. It may be that before long, a whole Thanksgiving dinner will be made into a kind of turkey and mince pie fluid and put up in a can to be sprayed down our throats each November, said one article about this phenomenon from the early 60s. Another one promised that tomorrow's housewives will be able to push a button on some cans and have a whole meal. This didn't happen. We have some spray foods, easy cheese, but this was not the revolutionary product category that it was envisioned to be. One of the reasons for that, or the increasing suspicion of this, was a changing legislative context, the 1958 Food Additives Law, which kind of imposed a new regulatory structure on all kinds of food additives, leading to the creation of FEMA expert panels and the GRAS list, but also a cultural shift, this kind of reemergence of this suspicion of food additives of all sorts, the sort of resurfacing of this argument that natural is better, more valuable, higher quality, and that synthetic and imitation products are adulterants that are somehow dangerous, or if not dangerous, at least not good for you. Which brings us to today, where, as many of you are aware, surely, there's this kind of vogue for so-called clean label, where all kinds of foods, even like the junkiest junk foods, are making a point of ridding themselves of artificial everything, and reformulating to be able to claim themselves to be all natural, or at least to fit the regulatory definition of such. But at the same time, there's this growing awareness of this crisis in food production and the food system. One part of it has to do with meat and the growing awareness of the way that meat and animal agriculture contributes to climate change, and the introduction of this whole array of new, high-tech foods that claim to give us some of the pleasures of the past with with a better ethical profile, with a better environmental profile. And the note that I want to end on is kind of, this is a cover from, or a cover of an article, I think, from Perfumer and Flavorist, that there is a role, I think, that has yet to be articulated for flavors, flavorings, and flavorists in this new dialogue about technology, food, and the future, where flavors and flavoring products are not yet, I think, widely accepted as important technologies that are going to help us bridge the gap, and solve some of our common problems around food access, food equality, environmental issues, environmental production, the sort of sustainable production and sustainable agriculture, and the existing food system. So I wanted to end on that note, maybe asking you guys if you have any questions, or if you have any ideas about how to talk about flavor as technology in a way that is interesting and accessible, and that actually conveys the central role that flavor plays, and quality and enjoyment plays in any food system. So on that note, I'll open this for questions. Thank you so much.